Hey everyone, and welcome to our new Let's Talk About It with Renee Otiende. And today we are going to talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. And I wanted to have her on because I think that she is honestly someone that is very passionate about it, someone that I feel has a lot of knowledge about it. And I wanted to ask her a series of questions that I know that oftentimes I hear people ask about when it comes to this topic. But before we get into it, I want Renee to share a little bit more about who she is, a little bit about her background, and then we'll jump right into it. So welcome, Renee.
Good morning or afternoon, wherever somebody's listening.
Right.
Yeah, so I currently serve as, I actually have two roles in my organization. So I help with and serve in training and development. So I lead training, write training, also work on development, career pathing, all the things that go under that in the organization. Then I also serve as our diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner and help work with our chiefs and lead that effort in our organization. So that's what I do. Officially, unofficially, I have a business with my husband. So we're working through that and then getting ready to start some other ventures as well professionally. So a lot going on.
I love it. Well, I can't wait. So we'll jump right on in. So let me ask you, what would you say is your definition of diversity and what does it mean to you?
I have it on my whiteboard at work. And I have to remember it. And simply diversity is the mix, period. Mm-hmm. It is the mix of people in your organization. And it is not just race. Mm-hmm. So diversity also includes, women, gender, LGBTQ plus, right? Also, you talk about a woman or a person who was a stay-at-home spouse for years and they come back into the workforce. Mm-hmm. You talk about disabilities. You're talking about a person who's a single parent versus a person who is having a household that is with two parents or all the different pieces mm-hmm. that make us unique is diversity. Mm-hmm. And how and they have to be, and you want them to be represented in your organization well.
Right. And so what would you say is your definition on inclusion?
So inclusion is making sure that mix of people work together well so that you get people who feel like they belong and you maximize your results as your organization. Because it is not just about the lovey-dovey, feely part of just making sure people feel like they belong. I love that. I'm a people person. I want people to feel their authentic self. But at the same time, you do any research goes just a little bit, you will find that when people are working authentically, feel like they belong and bringing their best, you will always maximize your results as a business. So it is a business case, not only a people case for why you want that mix to work well together. And that's the hard part, not bringing the people in. I can get you the mix and with a few little initiatives, but making sure those people work together well, that's the hard part, but that's what inclusion is. And that's why people are going to school for, studying, working hard to make that happen. So, yeah.
So why is this an area that you are passionate about? Because I know this is an area that you love, making sure, like you said, that people are able to come together, feel included, feel authentically that they could be themselves. Like, why is this important to you?
What's funny is, Kim, it's something I stumbled into. Mm-hmm. It was, if you were to ask me, gosh, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, where's your career path? Where are you going to go with this? It was not even in my realm of, it wasn't even my thinking. And I stumbled upon it. Someone asked me to join an initiative at our organization and it clicked for me. And really why I'm passionate about it is because it is a part of my story. Yeah. That has been written throughout my life. So it wasn't something that as I got into it, that was a huge surprise. I've found myself in different cultures all throughout my life, even from high school. I remember my first roommate in high school. I went to a boarding school, facts of life and everything. She was from Japan. And then my next year, my roommate was from Ecuador. And then when I got to college, I was with people from different cultures, and it just kept happening. And I kept finding myself in spaces where I wasn't easily offended. And I think that is a piece that allowed me to walk into spaces like this and to see people clearly. And so when I find myself on this diversity and equity inclusion initiative, I thought, part of my thinking is, one, this is the space for me, because I can go into these spaces, being a person of color, being a woman. Also, here's the other thing, being a person who is overweight, and I'm just going to talk about that. That is a part of diversity. A lot of times, people who don't have a healthy physical appearance find that they do not move up in the workforce. If they are not beautifully appealing, they do not move up in the workforce. So that's the other pieces I bring to the table that I represent. And the spaces that I've been able to find myself in, I wanted more people to have that. But the other part that I'm super passionate about is people being their authentic self. So when people cannot be their authentic self, you lose a huge piece of what they bring to the table. And I knew what it was like to not bring my authentic self for so many years. And you weren't getting the best of me. You were getting a good part, but you weren't getting the best of me. And now that I sit in a place where I am able to be my authentic self and bring all my gifts and talents, you get the best of me. You get the ultimate best of me. And I feel like I belong in my environment. I feel equipped to do that. I feel like my work is purposeful. And I want everybody to experience that. Why? I don't believe that people can't experience that. It takes work. It takes making sure people are in the right space and doing the right thing. Does it mean that everything you do, you love? No, but it ought to be a lot of what you do, you love. And I think people can experience that. And inclusion is what does that. It's a huge piece of what does that. It's a piece. It's not the whole thing, but it's a piece. And I know the freedom it is to experience being my authentic self. And so I want people to experience that as well. And so that's why I'm passionate about it.
No, but I love that, because I think that's what keeps, like you said, many people from just progressing and growing is because they don't feel good in their own skin, and they don't feel good in their workplace, or they feel like they're being misperceived or judged for things that, are just who they are. So I love what you said about that, because I think that's not discussed that much. Even when you mentioned about the weight side of it, it's the first time I ever heard someone mention that in the conversation with diversity and inclusion, honestly, because you tend to think culture, gender, race, and all these other different topics, but you never really think about, like you said, the physical side of it. Like that's the first time I've ever heard of that. So that's really interesting. It's an interesting part.
There are a lot of studies around who gets promoted and who do people feel like they can trust with the next level, and we operate out of bias. If anybody's ever, if you're studying anything around diversity, equity, inclusion, you're going to come up with unconscious bias. It's a huge piece to it. And the reality is that I don't believe you can eliminate it, and I don't want you to eliminate it. And here's the reason why. If you eliminate unconscious bias, people are going to have to think afresh every day. What's a car? What's a person? You don't want that. That's what your brain does to help you to function. What you've got to do is interrupt when unconscious bias has a negative impact on decision making. And there's just these studies around who we feel is beautiful and how we move them forward and who we think isn't. And I know that I felt that. I felt when I go into a space, I'm like, gosh, nobody looks like me. And it's not just Black, it's not just woman, but it's like, nobody has curves like I have curves sometimes, or it's also, activities we pick. So, at my organization, you know, sometimes they're saying, well, let's go out and do kickball, and let's go out and do softball, and let's go out and do these things. And I'm like, hey, y'all, for people who have disabilities or people who are not athletically inclined, you might have excluded them. Have we not offer other options? And so, do I want people to have fun? Yes, but I get to represent that and say, let me tell you how that feels, and might we do something different that those of us that aren't athletically inclined get to do. So it is that's why it's so tricky, because everybody just has these little pieces that make them special, that we got to figure out how do we put the spotlight on those and say that's good too, you know.
How do you integrate that? Because there are, like you said, different things about different people, and especially in the environment that we're in now, there's so many different things that can be sensitive, hot buttons, if you will, that you don't want to like touch on this landmine because it can blow up in this way, that way, what have you, especially in this space, because I feel like it's not always clear. You know, there's still a lot of ambiguity around that. So in an organizational space, how do you try to make sure you're representing everyone as much as possible? I mean, I know that's not always absolute, but what are some ways that you've tried to do that?
Yeah, it's tricky, because you can't be all things to everybody,
Right.
you know, and you've got to figure out where your organization is, what's going on there. There are some easy ones, right? Like Black History Month is going on right now. Women's History Month is coming up. Pride Month is coming up in June. Those are going to be your softballs. Take them, run with them. And there's a lot of guidance out there. Once you get that going, then I say you figure out what your second level is. What's the next area that we want to address? But what I will say is that's where employee resource groups are so helpful, because they are going to represent their culture the best. So when you have African Americans or people who are passionate about being allies for African Americans in the workplace, they're going to meet together and say, how do we want to be represented? Now, it's tricky because if you have a small organization, employee resource groups can be deunifying as an organization. And so you have to be clear about when you're going to move into those. But that's the beauty of that, because then the organization isn't doing the landmine or stepping in the landmine. The ERG is saying, hey, this is why we want to be represented. We think this represents us best. And then you get to do that. For organizations that aren't ready for ERGs or can't have them, then I think whoever you have, you've got to make sure that you have diverse voices that you're listening to. So if you're the one person on your team that is running this, or you're in HR and it just sits under your umbrella, how many people do you have speaking into you that are diverse, that don't look like you, that don't think like you, that represent almost an opposing viewpoint, so that you get enough data in that you make a clear decision? Because if you only are listening to people on your team, or only listening to people that look like you, or only listening to executives, you are going to miss this huge chunk of a voice. And that's where you step into landmines. There's so many times when we see large organizations do like an ad campaign, and you're like, you didn't ask the right person. Somebody was missing from your meeting, you know, because had you just had the right person, they would have told you don't do that, you know. And if you're only the one person, you've got to, and sometimes the voice you need to have is outside of your org. Sometimes you need to get people outside your org, or a mentor or someone, to say, hey, let me run this by you before we run it, and have them speak into it, because sometimes your org is not big enough to give you the diverse voice you need.
Oh, that's good. Okay, let me ask you this. Why do you think it's a challenge for companies, even with all of the topics and things that we see every day around this area? Why do you think it's still a challenge for them to implement these kind of programs into their company culture?
Two reasons. Number one, because I think there's two sides of it. One is, you said into their company culture. Most people, a lot of organizations, not most, but a lot of organizations either have an unhealthy company culture, or they either have a company culture that does not support diversity. So you're trying to lay diversity on a
Mhm.
foundation that's never going to work,
Mhm.
because either they don't care for people well, because a big part of diversity inclusion is just caring for people. They don't coach people well, so they don't have a culture of coaching. They don't provide feedback well. So when you don't have just basics of healthy culture, then diversity is, it's never going to stick. It's always going to feel like a program. It's always going to feel like a thing to do.
Mhm.
On the other hand, if you do have a company, there are places that have a great, healthy company culture and are struggling in this area.
Mhm.
And I think the struggle is because you're trying to change behavior.
Mhm.
And you probably have not incorporated diversity, equity, inclusion into how you hold people accountable.
Yeah.
You haven't included it, you haven't put it on the performance evaluations. You haven't in your one-on-ones, it's not a question that comes up. So what's happened is that it's still kind of sitting as a program that you just go through a training. You don't have it integrated into, hey, part of your bonus is this. And I'm not saying your bonus is how many people did you promote,
You're right.
as a person of color. I think promotion comes when you get to know people.
Mhm.
So my question is, what kind of questions are you having with your direct team? What,
Mhm.
especially as a manager, because studies show that inclusion happens at the team level.
Hmm.
Yes, there's a
Yeah.
leadership, level of executive leadership and what they have to do with that. Yes,
Mhm.
there is a personal self-awareness, but most of the change we see happens at a manager level
Mhm.
and with their team.
Okay.
And that means that manager is asking and challenging and giving feedback about inclusion. And if I know my manager is going to ask me about it, then
Mhm.
I'm going to start to integrate it. I'm going to start to say, I don't want to come in this meeting and not have anything to talk about, or not say how I'm growing in this area, or what my goals are. And then that manager, their manager ought to be asking them. And then it's like, hey, this is a part of who we are. It's not just layered on top. So I think it's two avenues. First, check your culture. If you think that's healthy enough to have a program, then when you're having it, how are you reinforcing it? How do people know this is not a program, but it's all intermingled
Right.
throughout everything that you do? I
So how
think
would you
that,
measure that too? Like how would
how
you
would you,
measure like diversity, inclusion, and equity it being successful in your organization? Because you can
yeah,
put the programs and initiatives together, but like what would be the measurement tools to say this is being successful at this point?
yeah, yeah. There, uh, I would look at one, if you don't have an engagement survey, you got to get one.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
got to get it. A lot of people are like, I don't know how I feel about, some people don't know how they feel about surveys, especially small orgs. You got to get one.
Yeah.
And it needs it, because the way you ask those questions, now you have data. So now you have data that you can go to. Second, you just need to, you got any good HR system is going to tell you what's our mix.
Yeah.
How many Black people we have, how many people, and it's going to be how people self-define. So you got to get that in there. I think you also look at promotions and turnover.
Mhm.
So who's leaving? Why are they leaving? And what is their mix? Do
Yeah.
you have a lot of African Americans leaving? You got a lot of people with disabilities leaving? Then that's where you got to do your work, because you are not having a place that they can come and thrive. But also look at who's getting promoted. Why are they getting promoted?
Mhm.
Um, you got to look at your interviewing. So
Yeah.
who gets past certain levels in interview? All of those things have data around them. And you really got to work to collect that data. And then once you collect that data, look at it and see, do we have any trends? What are those trends? We have a gentleman on our team who's a data analytics.
Yeah.
And he was like, I help you find the connections between the things you don't think are connections.
Mhm.
So I'm like, okay, hey, here's my data. Tell me what I don't see that we're missing, and tell me who the people are that aren't being represented well, or that aren't moving forward, or whatever it might be. That to me is your start. That's your start, and that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot of collecting, but get that data. That's going to tell you a lot about where you need to go next.
Mhm.
Starting the program is good, like you said. You just get it started. If it's a healthy organization, get it started. And then probably by maybe year one, at the end of year one, beginning of year two, maybe even in the year three, after you're gonna get some things going,
Mhm.
now analyze your data, figure
Right.
out, where you sit. And then that'll give you your focus area for the next years after that to make sure that you're making impact.
Mhm. Now, my next question is, it speaks to what you kind of said, an offshoot of it, but it's a statement that I heard maybe a few months ago, and I thought it was a really odd statement. A company asked in the roundtable I was part of is, why should we implement more diversity into our culture when we're already successful, when we're already thriving, we're already doing well. It was a very I'm trying to say the right way. But it just was not a diverse culture. Okay. But they're already experiencing great, success. So their whole thing is, why? What would I gain by adding all these different pieces in it? Is it just to satisfy what people are saying that we should have, or is it really going to add value to have this diverse culture when we're already doing well? What would you say to like a company exec or someone who thinks in that way?
I would challenge them to say, how long are you going to be successful? And the reason I would say that is because the scope, the landscape of America is changing. And there, years ago, and even now, you can still do it where, and I'll just say, let's say it is an African American organization, and their clientele are African Americans.
Mhm.
As you move forward, you are going to see less of just African Americans, because if I marry a person of another race, now my children are no longer strictly African American. And so what that means is they bring in two cultures. Even my children now, my husband's African, I'm African American. That's huge. Somebody may be listening to this and saying, oh no, but it's huge, because my husband was not born here, and he didn't come here at 25. So they have a mix of culture. So what appeals to me as an African American being born and raised in this country, and what will appeal to my children, is no longer the same. So if I have an organization that only thrives in this little niche of people, then you are now dependent upon that niche of people never changing. And as long as that niche of people never changes, then don't do it.
Right.
If you're only about the business of things and you don't see the beauty of the mix, don't do it. But I would question how long you're going to thrive in the industry you're in, because the landscape is going to continue to change, where even African Americans, even people that are underrepresented, our landscape changes.
Right.
And so if you don't have people in your organization that are looking different as well, then you are going to miss when the landscape changes and when you no longer are going to thrive in that environment. And maybe you won't see it now, but what I would say to what exec is only looking at this year? Any good exec ought to be strategic planning, right? And so if you just blow yourself out 5 years, I think you have a business case, just a profitability case on why you need diversity, why you need a diverse group in your organization. Also, I was on a call maybe a year ago, and they talked about we now have pictures of a black hole, right? Which people were like, you can't do it because that's where no light resides, right? So it's like no light resides here. So how did you do that? And they said, if you look at the team, if you go pull up the team who came together, it is one of the most diverse teams that you would ever see. It was just full of people who didn't look like each other, who shouldn't be working together.
Right.
And so for an exec who wants to grow their business, even if your clientele doesn't look anything like your group, if you just want innovation, if you want new ideas, if you want that, if you all look the same, you are only going to get to a certain, bless you, you're only going to get to a certain limit, and you're just going to hit the top because of your shared experiences, your shared culture, you will only get to a certain level. You bring in one person who just says, I look different, I think different,
Right.
your product is going to be better. So that those are the two things I would challenge them on.
No, that's really some good points. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and I'm going to have you just share your closing thoughts. Actually, I'm not going to ask you a question. I'm going to have you share your closing thoughts on this subject, because I think you provided such really great content and information. And so if someone's looking at this and they're just wondering, what's next in the space, or even what's next in terms of what you're going to be offering or doing, what would you share?
First, I would give encouragement to anyone who is in this space, because it is not easy.
Right.
You're trying to do something that you can't plug and play at different organizations. You can't go to another organization and say, tell me what you do, and try to do it in your organization. It won't work. Some of their things may work, but it just won't work. It's going to be hard. And so you got to understand your organization, and that's taxing. That takes a lot of your energy, and you're going to hear stories that are going to excite you. You're going to hear stories that are going to make you doubt if you're even making an impact. And you can grow weary in that. So one thing I would say to someone in that space is just don't give up. Find people who support you, encourage you, find a mentor in the space, or find other people who are doing it at other organizations and start talking to them, encourage each other, but also take care of your mental health. Like, go to a counselor or go to a group space. I don't know what you do, but do it, because in this space, you're pouring out so very much. You have to. You're pouring so much of yourself out. And if you're doing this well, you're being transparent and honest, and you're seeing your biases, and you're looking at all that, and that is straining. So find a place where you can do your mental health. For me, I am super excited about the space that I occupy, and just how I'm going to be able to influence people who are in this space. But also, Kim knows I'm super passionate about faith and faith steps and faith journeys and all those things. And so that's actually my next project, is looking at that and speaking to that, and trying to create some spaces for people to grow in that area, because I don't think I would be the person I am in diversity, equity, inclusion if I had not done some work and really seen that area for me, because this is a scary space. It is a scary space. And to be able to move into that, you've got to really rest on something a little bit bigger than yourself sometimes. So, or all the time. So that's my next ventures that we have that we get into, and I'm really excited about that.
Well, I'm excited for you too. I've been waiting for you to jump into this space. So
yes, Kim has always been there. So I thank you for your support anytime. So now I'm just gonna walk a little bit further in her encouragement. Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'm here for whatever you need. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you spending time today and answering all these questions. And I'm looking forward to seeing what your next steps looks like. And if we can support you in any way, let me know.
Yes, thank you. And anybody who's listening to this, I'm pretty sure my information will be in the show notes, but please feel free to reach out, because it was people who let me reach out to them and ask questions. So I'm totally available.
Yeah, thank you. All right, lady. Well, you have a good rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.